Before we begin, we publish new content every day. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. They say you never truly know someone until you see how they treat you when you can no longer give them what they want. I learned this lesson at 73, when my own daughter looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing more than a burden she had been carrying for far too long. My name is Eleanor, and for the past 15 years, I had been living in what I thought was a loving arrangement with my daughter Patricia and her family. After my husband Harold passed away, Patricia insisted I sell my little house in Portland and move in with them in their sprawling suburban home outside Seattle. She painted such a beautiful picture of our future together, how wonderful it would be for the grandchildren to have their grandmother so close, how we could finally spend quality time together after years of living states apart. I should have known something was wrong from the very beginning, but grief has a way of making you blind to warning signs. The first red flag came just weeks after I moved in, when Patricia presented me with a detailed list of household rules and expectations. She called it helping me adjust to their family routine, but the list felt more like terms of servitude than guidelines for harmonious living. I was expected to cook dinner 4 nights a week, do all the laundry for the family of 5, clean the common areas daily, and watch my twin grandsons after school until Patricia got home from her job at the marketing firm. In exchange, I was given the converted basement bedroom, which stayed cold in winter and damp during the rainy season, and access to the main areas of the house during specified hours. The financial arrangement was equally one-sided, though I was too trusting to see it clearly at first. Patricia had convinced me to put the proceeds from my house sale into a joint account, supposedly to make it easier for her to help me manage my expenses. What I later discovered was that she had been using my money to pay for family vacations, her children's private school tuition, and even improvements to the house that I was not allowed to have any say in. My Social Security check was automatically deposited into that same joint account each month, and Patricia gave me a small allowance for personal expenses, always reminding me how generous she was being and how much money I was costing the family. When I asked to see the account statements, she would become defensive and accuse me of not trusting her judgment, often bringing up how much she had sacrificed to take care of me. The emotional manipulation was subtle but constant. Patricia had perfected the art of making me feel grateful for scraps while simultaneously making me feel guilty for needing anything at all. She would praise me effusively in front of others for being such a helpful grandmother, then privately criticize everything from how I folded the towels to the way I interacted with the children. She developed a particularly cruel habit of discussing my future in front of me as if I were not in the room. During dinner conversations with her husband Mark, she would openly speculate about how long I might live and what they would do with my room when I was gone. She talked about assisted living facilities like they were inevitable destinations, describing them in clinical terms while watching my face for reactions. The children, sensing the dynamic between their mother and me, began treating me with the same casual disrespect. My grandson Tyler, who had once begged me to read him bedtime stories, started referring to me as that old lady who lived downstairs. My granddaughter Emma would roll her eyes when I tried to help her with homework, telling me that my methods were outdated and useless. For years, I accepted this treatment because I believed I had no choice. Patricia reminded me regularly that I was lucky to have family willing to take care of me, that many elderly people ended up alone in nursing homes with no visitors. She painted the outside world as dangerous and unforgiving for someone my age, full of scammers waiting to take advantage of confused old women. I began to see myself through her eyes, as a burden who should be grateful for any kindness shown to me. I stopped expressing opinions about household decisions, stopped asking to join family outings, and retreated more and more into my basement room. I convinced myself that this was simply what aging looked like, that independence was a luxury I could no longer afford. The isolation was perhaps the most damaging part of the arrangement. Patricia discouraged me from maintaining friendships, suggesting that my old friends from Portland were too far away to visit regularly, and that making new friends at my age was impractical. She convinced me to give up my volunteer work at the library, claiming it was too much stress for someone with my health concerns, even though I had never had any serious health issues. She monitored my phone calls and mail, always under the guise of protecting me from scammers, or helping me manage my affairs. When my old friend Margaret called from Portland, Patricia would often answer and explain that I was napping or not feeling well enough to talk. Eventually, Margaret stopped calling, assuming I had lost interest in maintaining our friendship. The few times I did manage to have conversations with people outside the house, Patricia would later grill me about what we had discussed, warning me about sharing family business with strangers who might not have my best interests at heart. She made me feel paranoid about trusting anyone but her, while simultaneously making it clear that even her trust came with conditions and expectations. My daily routine became a series of tasks designed to earn my place in the household. I would wake at 6 to start breakfast for the family, then begin the laundry while they ate. After they left for work and school, I would clean the kitchen, vacuum the common areas, and prepare ingredients for dinner. In the afternoons, I would watch the boys, helping with homework and shuttling them to various activities. Evenings were often the worst part of the day, when the family would gather in the living room while I cleaned up after dinner. I was welcome to join them, but only if I had completed all my assigned tasks, and only if my presence did not interfere with their activities. I learned to make myself invisible, sitting quietly in the corner chair while they watched television or discussed their days. Patricia had a talent for making me feel excluded while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. She would plan family activities without mentioning them to me until the last minute, then express surprise when I felt left out. She would have the children give me updates about their lives secondhand, rather than including me in conversations directly. The financial control became more apparent as time went on, though I was still too intimidated to challenge it directly. When I needed new clothes or wanted to buy gifts for the children, I had to ask Patricia for money from my own account. She would sigh and remind me of all the expenses I was creating for the family, making me feel guilty for having any needs at all. She developed a system of keeping track of every dollar I spent, presenting me with monthly summaries that detailed how much I was costing the household. These reports always seemed designed to make me feel ashamed rather than informed, with line items for utilities, groceries, and even an estimate of the wear and tear I was causing to the house. When I occasionally suggested that perhaps I could contribute more financially, Patricia would quickly shut down the conversation, insisting that she was handling everything perfectly and that I should not worry about such complicated matters. She positioned herself as both my savior and my warden, the only person capable of managing my affairs while simultaneously resenting the burden I represented. The breaking point came during the Christmas season of my 4th year living with them. I had been saving small amounts from my monthly allowance for months, hiding $20 bills in my room so I could buy meaningful presents for the grandchildren. I wanted to get Tyler a set of books about astronomy, which had become his passion, and Emma a jewelry-making kit she had mentioned wanting. 3 days before Christmas, I discovered that Patricia had been going through my room while I was out running errands with Mark. She had found my small cache of money and confronted me about it that evening, accusing me of hoarding cash and hiding assets from the family. She demanded to know where the money had come from and what I was planning to do with it. When I explained that I had been saving to buy Christmas presents, she became even angrier, telling me that I should have asked her permission before making any financial plans. She confiscated the money, claiming it needed to go back into the joint account where it belonged, and informed me that she had already purchased gifts on my behalf that I could give to the children. The gifts she had chosen were impersonal and generic, the kind of things you might grab at the last minute from a drugstore display. She presented them to me wrapped in paper that matched the other family presents, with tags that said "From Grandma" in her handwriting. When Christmas morning came, I watched my grandchildren open these meaningless gifts while Patricia accepted their polite thanks on my behalf. That afternoon, while the family napped or played with their new presents, I sat in my basement room and tried to remember the last time I had felt like a person rather than a problem to be managed. I could not recall a single conversation in recent months where Patricia had asked about my feelings, my interests, or my dreams. I realized that I had become completely invisible in my own life. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I walked upstairs and told Patricia that I wanted to have a serious conversation about our living arrangement. She immediately became defensive, launching into her usual speech about everything she had sacrificed for me and how ungrateful I was being. But something had shifted in me overnight. Instead of apologizing and retreating as I normally would, I stood my ground and asked her to listen to what I had to say. I told her that I felt more like a live-in servant than a beloved family member, that I missed having autonomy over my own money and decisions, and that I wanted to explore other living options. Patricia's reaction was explosive and revealing. She dropped all pretense of caring concern and showed me the anger and resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. She told me that I was selfish and delusional, that I had no idea how much trouble I caused or how much money I cost them every month. She listed all the ways I had failed to meet her expectations, from my inadequate housekeeping to my inability to properly discipline the children. She accused me of being manipulative and attention-seeking, of trying to turn the children against her with my pathetic attempts to buy their affection. Most devastatingly, she told me that I was welcome to leave any time I wanted, but that I should not expect any help from her in finding a new place to live. She reminded me that I had no money of my own, no credit history, and no references who would vouch for my ability to live independently. She painted a picture of me dying alone and forgotten, with no one to blame but myself for throwing away the security she had provided. Her words were designed to terrify me back into submission, and for a moment, they almost worked. The practical challenges she outlined were real, and at 73, the idea of starting over felt overwhelming. But I had crossed a line in my own mind, and I could not go back to pretending that this arrangement was acceptable. The next week, while Patricia was at work and the children were in school, I began making phone calls. I started with the Senior Services Department in the county, explaining my situation to a kind woman named Sandra, who listened without judgment and provided me with information about resources available to people in my position. I learned that there were apartments specifically designed for seniors with limited incomes, that my Social Security benefits were more substantial than Patricia had led me to believe, and that there were legal services available to help me regain control of my finances. Sandra connected me with a social worker named James, who agreed to meet with me the following week to discuss my options. The process of reclaiming my independence was slower and more complicated than I had imagined, but each small step forward gave me more confidence. James helped me understand that the joint account Patricia had created was legally problematic, since she had been using my money without my explicit consent for expenses that did not benefit me directly. With his assistance, I was able to open a new bank account in my name only and arrange for my Social Security payments to be redirected there. I discovered that Patricia had been taking nearly 70% of my monthly income, leaving me with far less than I was entitled to receive. The legal process of separating our finances was contentious and painful. Patricia hired a lawyer and accused me of being mentally incompetent, suggesting that I was being manipulated by outside forces who wanted to exploit me. She painted herself as a devoted daughter who had made tremendous sacrifices to care for an ungrateful and increasingly difficult mother. But I had documentation of my financial contributions to the household, and James had connected me with other professionals who could attest to my mental competency. More importantly, I had found my voice again and was no longer willing to be silenced by Patricia's manipulation tactics. The hardest part of the process was accepting that my relationship with my daughter might never recover from this conflict. Part of me kept hoping that she would apologize, that she would acknowledge the ways she had taken advantage of me and express genuine remorse for her actions. Instead, she doubled down on her victim narrative, telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned my family and chosen strangers over my own blood. She turned the grandchildren against me, telling them that I was selfish and mentally unstable, that I had chosen to leave them rather than appreciate everything their family had done for me. The pain of losing access to Tyler and Emma was almost unbearable, but I realized that they had never really been allowed to know me as a person anyway. Finding my own apartment was a revelation in ways I had not expected. The one-bedroom unit I eventually rented was small and modest, but it was entirely mine. I could eat what I wanted when I wanted, watch television programs of my choosing, and go to bed and wake up according to my own schedule. The first night I spent in my new home, I sat in my single armchair and cried for hours, not from sadness but from relief. I had forgotten what it felt like to exist, without constantly monitoring my behavior for signs of disapproval, without weighing every word before speaking, without feeling grateful for basic human dignity. Rebuilding my social connections took time and deliberate effort. I started volunteering again, this time at a local food bank where my organizational skills and life experience were genuinely valued. I joined a book club at the community center and slowly began forming friendships with women who saw me as interesting and worthwhile. Margaret, my old friend from Portland, was overjoyed to hear from me when I finally called her. She had assumed that Patricia's explanations for my unavailability were accurate and had worried about my health and well-being. When I told her what had really been happening, she was supportive and encouraging, reminding me of the strong, independent woman I had been before Harold's death. The financial aspect of my new life required careful budgeting, but I discovered that my needs were actually quite modest when I was not subsidizing an entire family's lifestyle. My Social Security payments, combined with a small pension from Harold's years as a teacher, were sufficient to cover my rent, utilities, groceries, and even some small luxuries. I bought myself a comfortable reading chair, something I had not been allowed to choose for myself in years. I decorated my apartment with photographs and mementos that had been stored in boxes during my time at Patricia's house. I established routines that brought me joy, rather than simply fulfilling obligations to others. The healing process was not linear or simple. Some days I felt strong and proud of my independence, while other days I was overwhelmed by loneliness and doubt. I missed the grandchildren terribly, and sometimes questioned whether I had made the right choice in prioritizing my own well-being over maintaining family connections. But as months passed, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I remembered that I enjoyed cooking when I was preparing food I actually wanted to eat. I rediscovered my love of gardening when I planted herbs on my apartment balcony. I found that I was naturally social and funny when I was around people who appreciated those qualities. A year after leaving Patricia's house, I received an unexpected phone call from Tyler, who had turned 16 and apparently tracked down my phone number on his own. He was cautious and confused, having been told conflicting stories about why I had left, but he was curious enough to reach out and hear my side of the story. I was careful not to criticize his mother directly, but I explained that I had needed to live independently and that my leaving had nothing to do with not loving him and his sister. We talked for over an hour, and he promised to call again soon. He did, and gradually, we began rebuilding a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and guilt. Emma remained more distant, perhaps because she was younger and more influenced by Patricia's narrative. But even she eventually reached out with questions about my new life. These conversations were tentative and sporadic, but they represented hope that the damage to our relationships might not be permanent. Patricia and I have had no direct contact since the legal proceedings concluded, and I have come to accept that this may be permanent. The daughter I thought I knew either never existed or was buried so deeply under layers of resentment and entitlement that she may never resurface. This acceptance was one of the most difficult parts of my healing process. I had to grieve not only the loss of our current relationship but also the realization that many of the memories I treasured from earlier years had been colored by dynamics I was only now beginning to understand. Patricia's need to control and manipulate had not appeared suddenly when I moved in with her family. I simply had not been in a position vulnerable enough for her to fully express those tendencies before. 2 years into my independent living situation, I have built a life that feels authentic and sustainable. I have friends who call me regularly, activities that engage my mind and body, and a living space that reflects my personality and preferences. I am not wealthy or extraordinarily healthy, but I am free to make my own choices and live with the consequences. I think often about other elderly people who might be trapped in similar situations, isolated and convinced that they have no alternatives to accepting mistreatment from family members or caregivers. My experience taught me that it is never too late to advocate for yourself, to seek help from professionals who understand these dynamics, and to prioritize your own well-being even when others try to make you feel selfish for doing so. The story I tell myself about this experience has evolved over time. Initially, I saw it as a tale of betrayal and loss, focusing on Patricia's failures as a daughter and the pain of family dissolution. Now I understand it as a story about reclaiming agency and discovering that independence is possible at any age, even when the path forward seems impossible. I am proud of the courage it took to leave a situation that was slowly erasing my sense of self, even though I had no guarantee that I would be able to create something better. I am grateful for the people who helped me navigate the practical and emotional challenges of starting over in my 70s. Most importantly, I am at peace with the woman I see in the mirror each morning, someone who chose dignity over security and authenticity over acceptance. The future feels full of possibilities in ways I had not imagined when I was living in that basement room, watching my life shrink smaller and smaller with each passing year. I may not have decades ahead of me, but the time I do have belongs entirely to me. And that feels like the most precious gift I could have given myself.